environmental justice is one of our interests, one of our positions, and that is the reason we're doing this program tonight. I want to also remind you that we advocate for a strong DEI policy, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're fully committed to DEI in principle and in practice. And with that said, I'd like to introduce Sharon, so she will introduce the speakers.
I know many of you are members of the League. If you are not, please consider joining the League of Women Voters. You can do that on our website, LWV-CC.org. And Sharon Boulevard back here is our membership chair. If you have any questions about that, she can help you. Also, I'm going to put a pitch in on September 16th. It's a Saturday. From 3 to 5, we're having a little fundraiser at the Art Center of Plano, and that's in the historic Evelyn House in downtown Plano in the Haggard Park. It's just going to be 2 hours of fun, little wine tasting and appetizers. We'll have Mayor Mines from Plano and Mayor Cheney from Frisco to give a few updates about what's going on in their cities. We have a nice little silent auction with some really quality items. So 3 to 5 on September 16th. We'd really love you to join us. It's $35 a ticket, and you just get a chance to mingle with some other league members. And as Janet said, you know, we're a nonpartisan organization. A lot of the things that we do are in voter services. Janice Schieffer is here. Janice Schieffer is here, and she does an amazing job with candidate forums, voters guide, and registering voters. So the one thing that I wanted to do as program vice president was to offer up some educational programming on issues that are important to us in our community and to our members. And I think two of the podcasts I listened to today related to climate and environment. So we thought it was really timely and really important topic to speak on. Happy to be here at the Plano Environmental Education Center. We have a hard stop at 8 o'clock, so if you want to take a little bit of light that's left at 8, and I'm sure it's lit out here, you go all the way around the building and see the plants that they have, and they encourage you to do that. So I hope you will take advantage of that. We're trying to be environmentally friendly here, so that's why we're using these glasses. They have this fancy dishwasher that's going to clean in 2 minutes, they told me. Sanitize them, so that's pretty cool. So just make sure you put those back up on the counter when you're done. We have some sheets with the full bios, a little bit of abbreviated bios of our speakers. So I'm not going to read all those to you because I really want them to come up here and present. There's also, their full bios are on our website, so you can go find those there. What was the other thing I wanted to say? Oh, please let them get through their presentations before you raise your hand to ask any questions. They might answer your question in the course of the presentation, and we want to give them our full attention for the time that we have. We will have question and answer afterwards. I put some note cards out there. There's some pens if you want to try to remember what you want to ask either to all of the panelists or to one in particular. Jot that down. But please don't interrupt in the middle of the presentation. We'll have a nice time for Q&A at the end. So we're going to start out tonight with Evelyn, Mayo, and Misti O'Quinn. When we had our healthcare program, I made mention that we were going to have something on environmental justice, and I was immediately led to your organization and gave Evelyn Mayo a call at Downwinders at Risk, and she was very happy to come and speak to us tonight. I'm just going to took a few things off their website. Downwinders at Risk is an organization committed to working for environmental justice with communities impacted by the worst pollution, to deliver the best science to those communities, to making decisions about pollution and polluters more democratic, to providing solutions to the problems they spotlight, and to funding staff devoted to grassroots empowerment. We know that educating and mobilizing communities is key to the important work that they do, and we are really happy to have Evelyn and Misti with us tonight. So without further ado.
Hey everyone, how you doing? Okay, good.
Start. You got the clicker there.
I need to purge. I have to have something to purge up
years now. We first met back in 2017, and we'll kind of give some of the background on the fights that we got first involved with. But in my full-time capacity, I work at Quinn College, which is the only historically Black college and university in Dallas. And there I teach environmental justice and land use planning. So that's my paid gig, and this is my unpaid gig, but both of them are very complementary. So I'll let Misti introduce herself too.
Yes, I too work 2 jobs for the price of one. By day, I am the North Texas organizer for the Beyond Coal Campaign Sierra Club, and for the rest of my day, I am causing trouble with these guys. So yeah, that's really it for me, simply put. I do everything from knocking on doors to making meals, kissing babies, and whatever else is necessary.
Yes, and this is the most recent picture of our board. We're missing 2 other people who weren't able to make it for Headshot Day, but most of our board is based here, grew up here in Oak Cliff, in Dallas, in the neighborhoods that we work most closely with. Myself and my co-chair are actually the only exception. I grew up all over the world. I left the US when I was 6 and didn't come back till I was 18. And my co-chair, Caleb Roberts, in the back, he's from Milwaukee. So we come with fresh eyes. But this is where we started. Okay, so this group, even though we've only been involved for the last 6 years, has actually been around for 30 years. It will be 30 years in 2024. So this is Sue Pope. She is the founder of our organization. We actually started fighting against the burning of hazardous waste in the cement kilns in Midlothian. Okay, so it was a very rural, mostly white, woman-led organization, and this was obviously much before our time, but really shaped who we are, and I think the kind of work ethic that we have. Our interim executive director, Jim Schoenbeck, he has been with the organization since this time. So he wasn't a founding board member, but he was the only paid staff person up until this year, okay? So the first campaign took 13 years, but they were actually successful. And like I said, I think that really shaped the ethic of both cleaner air and better democracy. It's about not just these green outcomes, but actually changing the pipeline of change itself to be more democratic, inclusive, and representative of, the needs of the people most impacted, right? So one of the next fights that we were involved with was actually shutting down a lead smelter in Frisco. How many of y'all even knew that there was a lead smelter in Frisco? Okay, so you all are a very educated crowd. Okay? Most people would not even imagine that there could be a lead smelter in Frisco, let alone one that operated well into the 2010s. Okay, but this place was rogue. It was completely unhinged, very little protections, very little control, and so it was a very intense but short campaign. It only took about a year for it to be closed down and cleaned up. But similarly, it involved organizing the people who lived there. It was really the mothers of the children who were impacted by this poison that got the fight to the finish line, right?
I'm going to jump in and ask, can anybody think of what would have made this fight a little bit shorter in the 2010s? Anybody that's been in this area for a long time?
Not the poverty level, right?
Well, actually, I moved to Plano in like 99, 2000, and I remember from the gallery coming this way, it was kind of like farmland, not a lot going on. But ever since that time, you noticed Plano has become Frisco and the colony. So development has grown out, which is something that kind of helps, because the houses that they're selling over there and at that price point, those people are not going to let a lead smelter be right next to their $500,000-$600,000 homes.
Great point. Okay, so another one of the campaigns, again in the 20-teens, was preventing the Dallas gas drilling ordinance. Okay, so the The city was trying to allow for drilling in parklands, and so again, required a coalition of different organizations coming together and actually having one of the toughest drilling ordinances in the country. So we also did some small work. It's a little hazy, guys. I can't really speak to what we did last month. No, really, that's a chapter in our history I'm less familiar with. And then, Donald Trump was elected, and a lot of the work that had made strides, maybe at the state level, at the federal level, that we've been involved with, rug pulled out from underneath us, right? Everything changed in terms of how we would approach our work and our fights. And so because of that, and this is actually the moment in our group's history that Misti and I joined the board, the focus pollution-wise became particulate matter pollution. And one of the reasons for that is because it's super localized. So this is pollution that is like dust, soot, anything that comes out of combustion, okay? So you're very, naturally, this is going to be impacting people that live close to where industrial operations are occurring, right? Which is majority people of color. And the reason for that is, well, there's a lot of science, a lot of research that will affirm that assertion, right? The exposure to particulate matter pollution disproportionately harms people of color across kind of class and income, okay? And the reason for this is the way that America built its cities. It was racially determined. We had segregation of races as the central land use policy, right? So you all may have seen redlining maps, maybe heard that term. That was when, the government and banks conspired to not provide home loans and other financial support to communities of color. But what also happened was industrial facilities got placed adjacent to and intertwined with those same Black and brown communities, okay? So it's a blessing and a curse, because the thing about zoning is it's a locally determined process, okay? That's not something that the state determines, it's not something the federal government determines. It is at the local level. How many of you all have been to a city plan commission meeting, or maybe heard about a zoning case in your neighborhood, right? So that's what I'm talking about. And so when you think about, okay, our focus is particulate matter pollution, and we know that this pollution comes from combustion as well as industrial manufacturing, then let's look at the zoning and land use where those things are steered to. And you can exactly track where you're gonna have the highest levels of asthma, the highest, cardiovascular incidence, and cancers, and it's gonna be all along the Trinity River floodplain where redlining occurred and Black and brown people were sequestered, okay? And this is 2023. This is the zoning map for the city of Dallas in 2023. And I don't have a legend here, but the red is industrial manufacturing, which is the heaviest zoning district. The orange is industrial research, which sounds nice, but it's really just the same as industrial manufacturing. And then yellow is light industrial, okay? And the reason we still have this is because it's constantly reiterated. Okay, so in 1965, the city of Dallas did its first real comprehensive land use plan that also came with a zoning code, right? Then they updated it in 1986, but it was more or less a reiteration of what they did in 65. So then in 86, they made an update, and then they did another update until 2006, which was more or less a reiteration of 86, which was at 65. So we have this iterative process that has baked in the same outcomes for communities of color that we had since the beginning, right? And so, anyway, I get worked up about it. So that's what we've been trying to do, is get to the root of the issue, which is roll back that zoning. The same way that it was put there is the same way that it can be taken back, right? So, how many of y'all heard about Shingle Mountain? Okay. So, that was a disaster disaster that was completely predictable. You had a neighborhood with industrial zoning that had homes in it, less than a mile from the landfill, okay? So the fact that we didn't have a shingle mountain before 2019 is actually kind of a miracle. What we've been trying to do since, because we're very involved with organizing the neighborhood in the Floral Farms community, as you can see, the Shingle Mountain site, right? And then surrounded by that industrial manufacturing and industrial research zoning, you've got about 25 single-family homes there with grandmas, children, goats. You know, it's a special place. It really is. But none of that's reflected on the zoning map. When you're down at City Hall and your plan commissioner is making decisions, should a rock crusher go here? Yeah. You got the dump there, you got all this zoning that's primed for that. Sounds like a really good place for that to go. And so time and time again, that's what's been happening. And so I will always remember one of the first zoning cases we went to with Floral Farms during the Shingle Mountain fight to speak against a rock crusher going where that, you know, lake looking thing is, the pond thing, was one of the plan commissioners saying, this is not a real neighborhood, right? And so that has always stuck with us and has always stuck with the groups that we work with, because then the question is, what is a real neighborhood? And how do you get the seal of approval that you have made it, you have become a real neighborhood, right? And so that's what this fight has been about, is dignity and providing neighborhoods with the same potential to thrive that their counterparts in not racially segregated parts of town, right?
To add injury to insult, after Shingle Mountain was moved, there was yet more industry that moved in and was trying to operate illegally. You would think the city would be paying attention to what is going on this property, that just had this very embarrassing file. You would think, right? No. So even now, that is still a thing, making sure until that zoning is changed, that there is not new industry that comes in and just mucks up the water all over again.
Right. That's a great point. So back in 2019, we met Marcia and immediately started working with her on trying to close down Shingle Mountain, because at the time the city wasn't even admitting that it was operating illegally. Okay. We supported her in organizing Southern Sector Rising, because again, we're not trying to be the ones at the head of the fight. We're trying to be the ones creating the base in the neighborhood, because they are the ones that can win. We can't win without them. They can win, right? Together. Oh, yeah, so Southern Sector Rising. Then we launched the Neighborhood Self-Defense Project, which was basically our program idea around, okay, let's make land use plans that actually do roll back the racist zoning and promote a vision that reflects the community's values. And so we worked over the course of a year to develop that land use plan. We supported the neighborhood in forming their own association called Neighbors United, Vecinos Unidos. And after a year-long process, we completed the neighborhood plan, which was the first bilingual neighborhood-led plan ever to be created in the city of Dallas. When we tried to get that plan adopted by the city in a process that other neighborhoods in North and East Dallas had done themselves, we were told that the process had changed, that was no longer an option, and that we had to wait until there was some other staff, right, radical. And so, because of that, we organized the Coalition for Neighborhood Self-Determination, because we believed this is a problem that does not just affect Floral Farms, it could affect any neighborhood that wants to say for themselves what they believe their future should look like. We also supported the neighborhood in envisioning a post-Shingle Mountain park. One of the biggest things that the neighborhood wanted was a gathering place, and so we worked with architects in the neighborhood to help co-create what basically what justice could look like for the community. If you were hurt so bad, how can you be made whole? And this was one of the concepts they come up with. The city of Dallas has since acquired this lot. They have the zoning they need to have a park placed on it. They have made no commitment to do so. And right now, Marcia's been blowing up our phones about some illegal dumping happening on the site. So again, it's really hard to understand how that can keep happening, right? So another more recent example is GAF, one of the roof shingle producers located in West Dallas. This is Jamie Cisneros. She, in her home, she lives on Bedford Street, which literally is adjacent to GAF in Fort Hair. That's where she grew up, and you know, time after time, she'll tell stories about different neighbors of hers that have died of rare cancers, and then when they, you know, move on, they can't repair or restore or pass on their home because they are also in an industrial zoning district. Okay, so it's another way that you're undermined in terms of generational wealth as well. Same deal, sea of red, bunch of orange, and what you don't see is the neighborhoods, which are on that south side of Singleton next to the big dot. You've got two residential areas that used to be connected. And West Dallas wasn't annexed into the city of Dallas until 1956, okay? So, GAF has been there since 1948. It was first Ruboroid, I hear different pronunciations. And then it became GAF, but they produced roof shingles, and they actually, you know, once I parked my car next to the factory and walked away, about 5 minutes later, it was covered in this black tar. I've got, you know, we've sent samples to our scientists at Texas A&M, and lo and behold, it had all these polyaromatic hydrocarbons, which are carcinogenic, right? So it's dangerous. It's a very dangerous position to be in. Same thing. The problem is the zoning, right? But they needed to have a neighborhood association that could represent themselves, that could have that seat at the table. And so they formed Singleton United. We worked with them over the course of a year on a neighborhood-led land use plan. And the interesting thing about GAF, Shingle Mountain was just a bunch of scammer idiots, right? Like they thought they could get away with taking the money from the dump, right, and then sell it back again. It was not very sophisticated, okay? But GAF is sophisticated. It's owned by Standard Industries, which is one of the biggest, you know, corporate giants based in New York City doing industrial production. But they have been a non-conforming land use, which means that when the zoning changed in 1986, they became kind of grandfathered in. They were not compatible with the future zoning code that was adopted since then. So for 40 years, they have sat there as a non-conforming land use that can be amortized, which I know is normally a financial term, but in this context, it just means the city or an individual has the right to file to bring them into compliance. And that means giving them X number of years to recoup their initial investment and then exit. That's how the lead smelters, if you were around or heard about the lead smelters in West Dallas and Oak Cliff, that's how they were shut down, using amortization, okay? So GAF is non-conforming, which is a good thing for us. We worked with researchers and attorneys on developing the case for amortization. There's kind of 9 factors that you have to meet, and then you have to present it in front of the Board of Adjustment, a quasi-judicial body in the city of Dallas, and basically make your case and win and prove that there's harm done to you, your property, your health, all that kind of thing. But before, as soon as we released that report, about 2 weeks later, GAF came knocking on the councilman's door and said, hey, we'd really like to talk to you guys about finding an amicable exit to this whole thing, right? So it shows that political pressure really works. It brought them to the table. So for about a year, the residents entertained these negotiations. Mostly GAF was not sincere about reducing their timeline. They proposed this 7-year closure period, but it was not based on the criteria of amortization. It was not the fair assessment that we felt needed to be done, right? Because how can you really compensate for the impacts that they've had on the neighborhood, right? So today, we're still involved with trying to get them to reduce the years. We're working with some experts to try and make that case clear. And stay tuned. This one's in the cooker. I'm going to pass it to Misti to talk a little bit about jockeying. I can go kind of way back into the history and stuff.
Oh my goodness, I'm not. So, jockeying. We started in jockeying about 2018, yeah. Currently there is Tamco there. There was Austin Asphalt. There's Texas Star. There's, at this point, I think the rail yard has expanded in the last few years from like 4 rail switch yards. I think there's about 7 or 8 tracks. And of course, the trains that come through there are not newer locomotives. They are the nastiest, the oldest, because what? They're dropping off asphalt. But we started there in about 2018 to do some air monitoring for them. This ties into us trying to use science to help communities fight against, whatever industry is in their backyard. But we did some air monitoring there to stop a new batch plant from getting permitting to start working in that area. Thankfully, we were able to work with community. That got shot down. And we decided, what can we do to start to dig at the root of the issue? And one of the things that we've learned is there's not a lot of air monitoring in Dallas. I think in all of Dallas County, yeah, you can do the clicking, just couldn't go. In all of Dallas County, there's two
Like safe ones?
Yeah,
Yeah.
2 EPA monitors. The closest one is over off Hinton Street. I think that's about 9 miles away from Johnson. Now, if I smell what I think is burnt eggs, aka sulfur, do you think that a monitor 9 miles away is going to pick that up? Is that going to accurately give readings about what it is that I'm taking in? It's not. So we went ahead and got some stationary monitors up. It was a consortium with UTD, I think Plano was in on it, some of Richardson. Dallas was asked to be a part of it, they declined. But it came shared at DFW. Any of y'all can go online and look at any of the monitors that are online in real time. And so we wanted to be able to bring that to this neighborhood. So we started with 3 stationary monitors. Each monitor comes with a suite of 10. We call it a mothership, which is the big one that sends all the information over the cloud. And then it comes with 10 babies. And so we started placing those in different parts of the neighborhood so we could get readings and kind of get an idea of, what are the air trends? What times of the day is there an issue? And then for the residents, if there is an issue, keep your kid inside because today ain't a good day to play. So, go ahead and go next. Oh, environmental health project. After air monitoring, Downwinders, Texas A&M, partnered together to do a 3-year-long community health study in Jockey. Not only did we want to get readings with these monitors that we put up, but we wanted to see how do these monitor readings correlate to what we're seeing in the people's health. So for 3 years, we started with a series of community events to get people to know what it was. We got a steering committee of Jockey residents together to inform everything that we did, from what type of food needs to be at an event, what type of information needs to be disseminated, what questions need to be on this survey. They need this information, but is this worded right? Is somebody going to take this in and feel comfortable answering this? And so we just, I want to say, last year, finished the actual survey. So right now we're in a phase of analysis. We actually ended up expanding this to West Dallas, to those folks that are living over by GAF. So we can ascertain what is it that y'all are experiencing. Is it COPD? Is it asthma? Is it cancer? What are these people experiencing? Because as we know, when you're dealing with any municipality, nobody wants to listen to what we consider common knowledge or what the people know, you have to come with that. So, what's the next slide? You know, I can't see. So, project is going on, and of course, we have to be ambitious. We can't just do one thing at a time for replenishment. So, we decided that we wanted to go ahead and put in an application to AggiBuild. And what AggiBuild does is they take shipping containers and they turn them into clinics, and they ship them all over the world. Thankfully, they thought that our idea, our issue with the community was worthy, and we got a clinic. We got gifted a clinic. So just a few months ago, the clinic actually was dropped on the property that we purchased in Joby. So we are currently working with some different providers trying to figure out who is going to be the best fit to provide medical care to this community.
And the nice thing is, because of all the architects that we've gotten to work with in Floral Farms and otherwise, you know, UTA and others are going to help with landscaping and having a wraparound porch and making it feel and look like something that's part of the community. So we hope to have a meeting space there too.
I know a couple of y'all have been on the eco tours that have been through Joby. How many of y'all have actually been through there? Okay, it's just a couple of y'all. Well, right next to the property that we purchased for the clinic, there is a community garden. So the hope is to continue to expand that into being like a wellness corridor. So, you know, there's a community garden, there's meeting space, there's medical care, and hopefully there will be no switch yard and asphalt plant. Cross our fingers. What we got next?
So those are 3 neighborhoods, but they're 3 neighborhoods that are in the crosshairs of all of this systemic racism, right? And so we work with each neighborhood individually, but we also want to see the bigger picture. How can we go at this for the neighborhoods that we don't have the time, capacity, or relationships to support, but who are dealing with the same problem? And so essentially, we, through the coalition, which includes all of these neighborhood groups, filed a HUD complaint. So a complaint to the housing, federal government, basically stating that the city of Dallas, by failing to address this zoning, this industrial zoning, is basically going against their housing rights, because they're unable to use and enjoy their property, they're unable to acquire loans. There's a lot of issues around housing and health outcomes that the city is responsible for. So this was filed last August, a year ago, and if you're interested, the city of Chicago recently, there was a similar coalition that filed a HUD complaint against the city of Chicago. HUD investigated. Chicago was found in violation of the resident civil rights, and so now there's a 4-month kind of plan, like remedies that involve addressing the zoning, and all of the kind of requests that the neighborhood is seeking. So we do have an investigator assigned. All of the residents have given their testimony, and we've been informed that the city is now being interviewed as well. So we're hoping for a similar outcome, just as egregious, if not more, compared to Chicago. So that would bring all the neighborhoods together in a systemic way, those that we are working with and those that we are not working with. So that concludes our presentation. I feel like we really just talked a lot.
Yeah, we said a whole lot. So if y'all have questions at this point, feel free.
Yeah.
Why don't we take about 10 minutes or so to ask questions of this group, then we'll have the next speakers up, and then we can do maybe possibly a few more minutes of Q&A. If there's something on your mind right now that you want to ask.
And it doesn't necessarily have to just be a question. It can be a thought. Yes, ma'am.
Are you familiar with Breckenridge Park? Like what they've done with Breckenridge Park? That was a dump. That was a city dump, and then they covered it over and built homes and stuff. And they used to have these big tower things that would suck out the fumes or whatever that were
methane.
Yeah, the methane. And I don't think those towers are there anymore, but we've lived in Murphy about 20 years. When we first moved there, I used to see those, Anyway, I think that's kind of a good way to to handle, like, or to make use of like a dump, algorithm, right? If it's safe.
So they actually did that. Right on the south side of Loop 12 from where Jockey is, at 45 and Loop 12. That's where McComish used to be. Well, they moved the landfill site just a little bit down 310.
Right.
They said about 310 Simpson Stewart. And they put a golf course over. Golf course ain't doing so great, because it's like, you gotta imagine that all of that stuff is seeped in the ground. So, I mean, I personally would not want to look to that, because now I'm thinking like, what's the groundwater doing? Like, what's happening? And I know that's because I do this work, so I think in those terms. But that kind of scares me a little bit.
It's safe to live over there.
Yeah, because like what really needs to be done to remediate that land so it is safe? Because at one point it wasn't.
Right.
So what did they do? How much did they have to dig up and move for it to be safe? Yes, ma'am?
Where is Jockey?
Jockey, if you get on I-75 and drive south, once you pass downtown,
So
it's
like
not
45?
75, it turns into 45.
Okay.
After you pass Overton, there is a Linfield exit, and then there is Loop 12. Between Linfield and Loop 12 is where Jockey is, just to the east.
Is it near, it's not near Fair Park or?
Actually it is. It's a couple of miles away from Fair Park if you take the
East of Fair Park?
No, it's east of I-75. Or I-45.
This is Fair Park here,
Okay.
right? The river cuts the city, right?
Right.
So Fair Park is on the north side of the river. Jockey is on the south side of the river. Only about 10 minutes away, but you do have to go over a bridge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm reluctant to ask this because it's gonna sound bad.
It's not.
I support what you're doing, you kind of mentioned it when you talked about the GAF plant, that it was there in the 1940s. So it would have been there like before the houses, or were the houses there?
The houses were already there.
The houses were already there. So, I mean, we do still need some industrial areas because they produce things that we want. I agree they don't need to be red. I understand the problem, but it's like, well, so where are they supposed to go? And how, as in the case of GAF, you kind of indicated that there was some financial means of moving them. I mean, it's not right to kind of say, oh, we freeze out, then you need to
So, they have been operating long enough to have recouped the money that they put into that business for it to run. There were already homes. The issue is not whether or not they should be able to operate. The issue is whether they should be able to operate in someone's backyard.
Well, but where are they supposed to go?
Yeah.
And
That's a
how-
conversation
and how
that we
do
can have.
we-
There's no answer to that.
And
That's a
how do
conversation that
we
needs to be had.
reasonably kick them out?
Yeah, so I'm a land use planner, that's what I have my master's in, and that's a question I think that's happening across the US. Where is it appropriate to have these warehousing hubs? Where is it appropriate to have all these manufacturing places? Far from people is the bottom line, right? Because what we're seeing is quality of life, health impacts really, really bad, especially the more that we learn about particulate matter pollution.
Yeah, no, I'm not arguing that at all. It's just a curiosity.
Oh, yeah,
All right, if we want to get rid of them, how are we going to do that and where are they going?
Sure, so I mean, in Dallas specifically, there's something called the Inland Port, which is south of 20, okay? And it's a conglomerate of like Hutchins, Wilmer, Dallas, Duncanville maybe.
No, it may stop at Lancaster.
Lancaster. And it's basically all these cities that have come together and said, this is an undeveloped area with a rail port that is actually one of the biggest import, destinations for South America, for the whole country. So again, just like gentrification, people think it's when, one family moves into the new house on the block. No, it is big economic forces at play. Same thing with these systems, right? These are rail tracks that have national distribution patterns and all of that. So the inland port is being developed as that place where industrial uses should be concentrated because it actually makes all the processes more efficient. I mean, GAF is sitting out here surrounded by restaurants and schools and daycares and, you know, it's not a great place for hot asphalt to be bubbling over, you know? And so it does not make sense for them to be where they are now, and it probably hasn't for about 50 years, just based on what's happening in terms of land use patterns. Think about Jockey. We do have a switchyard there, the Union Pacific switchyard, and there was an asphalt batch plant called Austin Asphalt that actually produced the asphalt that was then used by Tamco to create their shingles. Austin Asphalt is now gone,
They
okay?
shut down on the 25th of June.
Right. So this is what I mean. The economy is moving in such a way that these very old, very decrepit facilities that are in our center, city centers, it's not the right place for them, right? So that would be my answer. Again, I'm really only very familiar with Dallas, but I think it does depend city to city where is the right place. You know what I mean?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I know the city of Dallas, their Dallas Reads book last year was the accommodation, and it talked a lot about redlining and zoning and, you know, how a lot of these places came to be where they were and those types of things. And I know there's still a lot of discussion around that and meetings and things. Do you all ever get engaged with some of those folks that are trying to look at solutions that relate to some of those?
I think a lot of times those are open forums for people just to sit down as community or just free thinkers and you know, spitball. I haven't seen those conversations necessarily happen in a more formal setting. But I would love for those things to happen.
And I would say one of our Dallas Truth Racial Healing, right?
Jerry, you're
Yeah,
right.
one of our funders and kind of biggest allies, Dallas Truth Racial Healing and Transformation, their whole mission and kind of MO is to make a more racially just city.
Mhm.
And so we collaborate with them a lot. Because it is, I mean, in the shift from a rural, you know, mostly white base in Midlothian 30 years ago to the groups we now work with today, there's also been a shift in the types of groups that we work with. And most of our allies are Black churches and, you know, colleges and kind of youth groups, as well as racial justice organizations. So.
You know what? The one thing that I don't think that I've said this whole time, Jockey is a free town. That was settled in the 1800s. That land was given to them by a plantation owner that decided to give them that land to those free slaves so they could settle it. The switchyard was not there. Tamco, Austin Asphalt, none of that stuff was there. People used to live on both sides of the tracks. All of that stuff was planted there after the peace. That would not be allowed to happen at that point in what was settled Dallas. But that is the only place at that point that Black people were able to live. And so that is the framing that we look at specifically in that case, separating polluters from people, because they never should have been in the first place.
Right. Exactly, and there are great rules.
Just a quick question. In these talks with these companies, just not any specific one, but generally speaking, are there conversations about alternatives to moving, such as cleaner production, safer production, so that it's not the issue that it is now? Are those parts of the talks, or is it situational where that's just not possible for us to be any cleaner or safer?
I think most of the time these plants are so decrepit, the money that it would take them to put into upgrading these facilities to where they had, you know, best available technology, it's not financially feasible. It doesn't make sense for them to do that. They would do better to create a new facility somewhere else than to try to upgrade this one that's, you
Just to kind of
know,
put
on one
that
leg.
in the conversation there.
Yeah.
And also, again, keep in mind, we're in Texas, and, you know, I know the next how the state sometimes inhibits our ability to do the right thing at the local level. And for example, with GAF and asphalt shingle production, the best available control technology oftentimes has been nothing, like no scrubbers, right? And that's because some of these industries just haven't been regulated properly to prevent, you know, the harm that they cause. So again, there are great solutions. Many of us have lived our whole lives without living next to a factory, right? And we've still benefited from all the production, shingles on our homes, all these things, but it's been imbalanced. As a society, we have to share the burden as well as the benefit, right, with these resources, and that's not what's happening right now.
And it's, I have one quick question for you, because I don't think y'all mentioned it. For those of us who are just like regular citizens that don't run for office and don't work in the city, how are we able to get involved to support what we're doing?
You just described both of us. We are regular citizens not running for anything. So we always love volunteers. We also, selfish plug, are raising money. This all costs money. We have 3 staff people. We have to fundraise for them. We have to apply for grants for them. Giving Day is coming up, and we would love any contribution you can make. But please see us after. We'll take your information down and show the newsletter, whatever you'd like.
You don't have to know to get involved. I used to work in insurance. I was very little that decided I didn't like attorneys because I felt like they were in jeopardy. I didn't know nothing about environmental things until I fell in with them. And they just threw me in and I learned on the fly. So if it's something that you have a passion for, just do it.
Very good. Well, I probably don't need to say too much because I've known David for a long, long time, and I know Rita and the work that they do. David's involved with the Sierra Club. Rita's involved with all sorts of organizations. They all do work around the environment, whether it's lobbying, advocating, getting people motivated to go do something. So I'll let them tell their stories, and David can lead.
Well, like David's looking for is fine. We're married.
You would never guess, would you?
We're like political advocates, but my name is Rita Beving, and I work for Public Citizen at the moment. I also work for Sierra Club nationally and locally, and worked with Clean Water Action. And we have commonality with Downwinders at Risk because my first fight was with their director on the TXI fight in Midlothian, 1995, kind of way back there. But we fought that all the way up to the Supreme Court. Wow. So that was my first fight. Since then, I work on a variety of things. I'm a lobbyist now for Public Citizen, but I started out as a volunteer advocate, just like everybody else. I work the Keystone XL pipeline out in East Texas. I do a lot of work on eminent domain. I've worked the legislature since the year 2000. So I'll just stop there and let David introduce himself.
And I learned everything I knew about the environment. In fact, when we first met, she was involved with Downwinders in the fight against the TXI cement kiln in Midlothian. So we have that in common with Downwinders from the very beginning. We even delayed our wedding for how long? 2 years while she was involved in this fight. So we go back a ways. I am an officer and involved with the Sierra Club, and Rita's in like 5 or 6 different groups. So I want to talk about the Sierra Club because, as someone asked earlier, how can you get involved? Well, we have a Sierra Club group that covers North Texas, and any of you could get involved. So I want to give you a little background of what Sierra Club is, in case you don't know, and then invite you to potentially participate in some of the activities, because we've done some similar things in the community that Downwinders has focused on. But this is my presentation for you tonight. I want to tell you a little bit about the background of Sierra Club. It's a very old organization, founded in 1892. It is the largest and the oldest, and some would say the most respected conservation organization in the country. It's quite large. We have quite a few people. Our mission is to explore, enjoy, and protect the wild places of the earth. Originally, back in that period of time, at the turn of the 20th century, Sierra Club was involved with our founder, John Muir, and President Teddy Roosevelt. As a matter of fact, they went hiking together in Yosemite, and he convinced the president to encourage Congress to designate Yosemite as a national park. So we were involved in protection of the land, and as it says here, the wild places, way back well over 100 years ago. To practice and promote the responsible use of the Earth ecosystems and resources, and to educate and enlist humanity to protect and restore the quality of the natural and human environment by all lawful means. Now, what about our organization? We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization with over 1 million members and over 3 million supporters nationwide. Our state chapter, the Lone Star chapter, on which I am a member of the executive committee, has over 25,000 members. We have local groups across the state. 9 of them actually are left, and the Dallas group has a little over 3,000 members. Dallas group includes Collin County, so if you should happen to live in Plano or McKinney, you would be a part of the Dallas group. We have some core values that have been really emphasized in the recent years, because as some of you know, you can't really be effective as an advocate for a community unless you can identify with that community. And the Sierra Club has been involved in DEI work for quite some time. But in recent years, we've become even more committed, not just to DEI, but to actively working against racism. Our previous speakers spoke a little bit about the redlining and some of the systemic, long-time systemic and built-in racism in our society. That's something that we should all recognize. And unless we recognize it, working with people who are in those areas are not going to fully appreciate and respect you. So respect is important. We do this through a balance of caring for ourselves and others, a collaboration to create just relationships that support collective work, and being justice, being able to, or being accountable for our actions, our work, and how we show up with trust and respect. This is part of the core values of the modern Sierra Club. All right, let's talk about our chapter. That's the state of Texas. There are 53 chapters across the country, or 63 chapters across the country, and Texas has one called the Lone Star chapter. It includes everything in our state except El Paso, and they somehow got put in the New Mexico Rio Grande chapter. But we do a lot of legislative work in Austin. Rita's going to talk about some of the work that Public Citizen and other groups do. We have quite a coalition in Austin, and we generally work pretty well together as environmental groups to try to support and oppose good and bad environmental legislation. You're going to hear a lot about that from her shortly. We also, in addition to the legislative work, we do policy work. We have expertise on our state staff that works with TCQ and other state agencies to try to improve the environmental policy, which is the non-legislative work, the executive work, executive agencies. We have city council and county commission work that we do, which we talked about a little bit earlier. Various environmental groups working on that. And the political advocacy statewide, both local and state issues. And then finally, for fun and recreation, We have outings and community involvement to explore and appreciate the outdoors through activities and education, outings for our members. But we also have a special program called ICO, which is Inspiring Connections Outdoors, what it stands for. And we have people who bring young people from underserved communities out to enjoy the outdoors, to go hiking, and to do things that they might not, be the typical thing that they do. We want to bring that opportunity to young people. So that's some of the activities we do. Now, political advocacy is what I want to focus on because this is mostly my work. We have been supporting environmental and social justice causes for some time. In some of the very same areas that Downwinders mentioned. We particularly were involved very early in Jockey, back in 2017, I believe it was. Then Lane Plating, which is a Superfund, an EPA Superfund site that was ignored for 80 years. In West Dallas, in some of the fights there was a 2017 batch plant fight that we worked with their city council member and some of the community folks in West Dallas. We were invited to participate with that. There's been issues in Garland with a battery plant there that caused quite a bit of a problem. It's still doing it. In fact, there was a recent fire, I believe, at the Sherwin-Williams plant that was an environmental hazard in that community. So, in general, we've been involved in that for some time. And then nationally, we support other rights, and even in Texas, the rights of indigenous people. I think it's important for us to recognize that we are all sitting on the land of indigenous people that was not necessarily taken perhaps in the right way. The Comanche, the Caddo, the Tonquá, and the Kickapoo tribes were roamed in this area of North Texas. And it's important for us from time to time to remember that because that is an important part of our history. Protecting Texans Americans' Right to Vote Democracy Initiative. This is a group that's very much into democracy issues, and you probably followed in the last two legislative sessions some of the efforts to supposedly fix election problems. Some people didn't think they fixed them, that they perhaps made them worse. But nonetheless, they were political issues that were involved. I went to Austin several times, both in the 87th and the 88th legislative session. 88 is the one that just finished, to testify on some of those bills, for and against some of the election protection programs that were set forth. So Sierra Club is very much involved in democracy issues. We have an entire department in our national office that deals with the right to vote and preserving and expanding the right to vote for Americans. Then there's the different parts of the country. Lead poisoning, public transportation, and affordable housing are issues that are important nationwide. We have a large initiative in Michigan, Flint, Michigan effort with the lead poisoning. Criminal justice reform is another effort that Sierra Club is involved in nationally. Okay, to conclude, I wouldn't be talking to a voting group if we didn't talk about the next election, which is coming up in November. November 7th, the Texas Constitutional Amendment election. The Sierra Club, Sharon, I hope it's okay for us to tell you the position we've taken on a couple of these issues. Proposition 7, the State Energy Fund. Sierra Club has come out with a position on no on this one. This was the Senate joint resolution that was tied to a bill by Senator Charles Swartberg, which would create low-interest loans for new dispatchable power plants. And most likely this will be natural gas plants. And Sierra Club has not favored this expansion of natural gas plants. This was part of Lieutenant Governor Patrick's restoring, empowering Texas agenda. So we have taken a position no on Prop 7, the State Energy Fund. But a very strong yes vote on Prop 14, the Centennial Parks Conservation Fund. Texas parks are 100 years old this past year, and Senator Tam Parker of Denton County promoted a bill which turned into a Senate joint resolution which would allocate over $1 billion to new park acquisitions from the rainy day fund. This was a near 100% bipartisan supported effort, and it is one that we strongly support. So finally, this is the website. I am the political chair of the Sierra Club Political Committee. TurnTexasGreen.org is our website. You can find any of our endorsements going forward there. There's not any people endorsements this time because we don't have those on the ballot, but we have taken position on 2 of the propositions for the constitutional election. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Rita for the Her slides are better. She's a graphic designer.
Oh, I know how to do it, thank you. That is totally exactly what thank you. Well, thank you.
Just so everybody, in case you're not familiar with Public Citizen, it's a national nonprofit group founded by Ralph Nader 50 years ago. We're 50 years old this year. The only office outside the DC office is our Austin office, and I'm the North Texas person. I'm to myself. So I'm going to jump into the legislature here in a second, but I just want to mention some other fights that have gone on in the DFW area. Some that you might have heard about, some you might not. One fight that I've recently got involved with, both in Congress and down at the State House, is ethylene oxide. Ethylene oxide is a sterilizer. Often medical facilities will send medical equipment to sterilizing plants. And what those are big gas chambers that gas medical equipment, everything from a scalpel to something bigger with ethylene oxide. It's highly toxic, it's highly flammable, it's highly explosive. Just last month, a plant blew up in Louisiana that Dow Chemical owned. And speaking of environmental justice, out in Grand Prairie, there are 2 sterilizer plants, literally blocks from each other. And they put almost 250,000 people at risk within 5 miles of the plant. If you can envision where DFW is, go south on 360 on the east side between Carrier Parkway and Post and Paddock, and that industrial complex right there, you will see Sterigenics and I can't think of the other. But Sterigenics and another plant are very nearby. It puts over 100 schools and daycares at risk. Most of the folks that live within that 5 miles are low income. More than 10% don't have English as their first language. And there was an EPA rule put out there on ethylene oxide. We lobbied Congress. I came back and got a lot of legislators to sign on to the proposed rule. Believe it or not, the legislator out there would not sign. And I'm very disappointed, but Mr. VC may see a town hall very soon near him regarding this issue. But there's been other things. You have problems with, like David mentioned a minute ago, about the Globe Life battery plant in Garland. Out near that area in Garland, there's 179 facilities altogether. The neighborhoods themselves got together and looked at high cancer clusters, a lot of brain cancer near that area. Where I'm talking about is just south of Forest, right up where Shiloh is.
Not only did Globe Life Battery Plant end up dumping all sorts of toxins, namely lead and arsenic, into Duck Creek, but then just the other week, we all heard about the Sherman Women's Plant exploding. Guess where all that went? Back into Duck Creek. Duck Creek flows right in back of an elementary school. Just maybe a mile out. So what Misti said and what Evie said is these communities are often dumped on and dumped on and dumped on. Where GAF is located, EPA 30 years later has tested the air for asbestos from a vermiculite site called Terralite that's been bulldozed clean. They took asbestos-laden material from Libby, Montana, and put it in their vermiculite, Terralite gardening substance. And here we are 30 years later testing the air. Plus they've been dumped on by batch plants and other industry in back of them. So this is what these kind of neighborhoods are plagued with, including concrete batch plants. You'll see West Dallas, South Dallas. We have over 219 batch plants in Dallas-Fort Worth. We even beat Houston on that. It's time that we stop that these communities are not dumped on constantly. So with that, I'm going to jump into the legislature, and I'm willing to tell you this is one of the worst sessions I've ever worked since the year 2000. I was a volunteer, just like many of you volunteer for the League. And, you know, we're talking about environmental justice tonight. And I want to throw up the EPA's definition of environmental justice. The fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. The goal will be achieved when everyone enjoys the same degree of protection from environmental and health hazards, and also equal access to the decision-making process to have a healthy environment in which to live, learn, and work. Since I've lived in Texas and have been in many permit fights, whether it's coal plants in East Texas or land farms, C&D landfills near McKinney, our state agency has failed us, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. We used to call it the Texas Natural Resource Conservation Commission. Many of us call it train wreck. But our agency has miserably failed the people of Texas. Less than 2%, actually more like 1.5% or less, of permits that industry applies for, whether it's land, air, or water, are ever denied by that agency. They think of them as an administrative agency basically to rubber stamp these permits for industry. They don't consider any of the other industries around it. Each industry that applies for a permit is like an island unto itself. As a matter of fact, that agency was under what we call sunset review this session. It only happens every 7 to 10 years. All state agencies get reviewed, and that those agencies can be continued or what we call sunsetted. In other words, they are no more. Some of them are rolled in together to make a new agency. Not only was TCEQ under sunset review, but so was the Public Utility Commission and ERCOT. Guess what happened? Almost nothing to reform the agencies, all three of them. So I'm going to talk about broad categories of bills this session. We probably, our organization, along with a number of other groups, we have a group called Alliance for Clean Texas. It's probably 30 environmental groups, big, small, all over the state. Some have different focuses. I track bills We probably were tracking 600 bills this session, but the ones that really relate to environmental justice just fall under a few categories. For years, people like Representative Anchia, former Mayor Eric Johnson, when he was a state representative, they filed climate bills. Guess how many climate bills have ever gotten a hearing in the last 3 sessions? 0. And that comes everything, including, for instance, having a state committee that sees what all of us could do to mitigate climate change, to even ask agencies to formulate climate policies that apply to what the agency's missions are. None of them have been heard the last 3 sessions. Permitting. There were at least 6 bills about notice and consideration of cumulative impacts on TCEQ air permits. You know, I mentioned a minute ago, we've got all these polluters clustered together. A concrete batch plant, GAF shingles plant, other plants, all together. They only consider each plant and the pollution it puts out. They don't add the pollution piled on from all the industries around them when they consider a permit. None of these bills passed. Some of the bills, one was targeted directly at GAF, who was going under a federal air permit, we call it New Source Review. Representative Anchia from Dallas offered a bill on that. Other people like Representative Dutton, Representative Jarvis Johnson from Houston, Senator Miles offered bills on permitting to get better notice for all our communities on these permits being applied for. They even tried to get bills that if there was a violator in a representative or senator's district, that they would at least be notified that they were a problem company. None of them passed. On water, there were bills to address lead in pipes at schools. Because especially in environmental justice communities, where do we see some of the oldest crumbling schools? In those neighborhoods. Representative Collier and others have tried to push bills to get financial assistance for schools, especially the low-income schools, so they could get rid of old pipes that could have lead. The next category, concrete batch plants. Over 15 bills were offered on concrete batch plants. This is an area Downwinders, our group, Sierra Club's very familiar with. Just the other night, Andy and I were in a hearing on Texas Star that's threatening the job area with an operator that's not legally operating right now. That TCEQ has just let it go. What were these concrete batch plant bills about? Some of them were about reforming a standard batch plant permit versus a temporary. That they should be paid, that there should be limits on their hours, that there should be certain noise levels that are only allowed, that the bag houses are a certain way, including where they're sited, how many yards they are away from a residence to expand it from 440 yards to 880. Representative Landgraf was chair of the Environmental Regulation Committee. You know when he heard the bills? At the last possible date to hear the bills, and if they weren't out of committee by the next Monday, they couldn't go any further. It was gratuitous, and he did it intentionally, because he did it last session on the same thing. Lastly, scrap houses. Where is a lot of illegal dumping happening? In underserved communities. I'm very proud of Representative Benton Jones, brand new representative out of Dallas. He offered 2 scrap tire bills. One that would track a tire cradle to grave.
Wow.
So in other words, if you had somebody in their old pickup drive up to some change your tire place and say, oh, I'll take those off her hands and I'll just do it for this, that they couldn't get by would turn around to some back 40 or the ditch and dump in those tires. Those tires would have a tracking on them. From the moment it comes to the tire dealership to the moment it gets disposed. Guess what? They didn't get passed. So hopefully I can make this work. Okay, so here's some of the bills I was talking about. Representative Ron Reynolds, he actually wanted to try and get an Environmental Justice Council at the TCEQ. Never even got a hearing. And she has a bill about new source review, which went directly to the GAF plant, who was applying for their new source review permit. And basically said the cumulative effects around the facilities of any new source review permit, those had to be considered. Senator Miles, who is my hero from Houston, Senator Miles, SB 179. It would require the TCEQ to consider cumulative impacts of air emissions within 3 miles of a new permit. There were various iterations of this offered by Representative Dutton and others. Representative Goodwin probably had the most comprehensive bill on concrete batch plants. Everything from the paving, the fencing, the noise, the dust, etc., to improve that. Never got a hearing. Senator Schwertner from Georgetown. This bill and one of Senator Miles' bills went the furthest. This got to Abbott's desk. All he wanted to do was try to shorten the renewal of a concrete batch plant, a standard, from 10 years to 6. Abbott vetoed it on his desk. And I just mentioned to you, Evelyn and I were at a hearing the other night with somebody who's illegally operating, said they had been open since 1955. The operator lied to the whole audience because I believe they only owned the plant since 21. Okay? That's some of the stuff we deal with at these hearings. I want to bring up 2 bills that passed that affect environmental justice communities, but also affect all of us wherever we live. But it hurts environmental justice communities even more. Senator Springer, former rep from Munster up north, passed a bill, Abbott signed it, that allows the TCEQ to ignore citizens' complaints against a polluter if it's repetitious. If TCEQ, which someday at times doesn't come out after you complain for as long as a week, and that doesn't work in air, right? Because it dissipates, right? If they can't substantiate it, or the complainant has filed 5 complaints within the past 7 years. You know how this bill started out? He wanted you to pay a fee if you filed 3 complaints in a calendar year. This was his compromise that Abbott signed. So beware, everyone. If something moves near your backyard, your neighborhood, your town, and you file too many complaints, TCEQ has permission to ignore it. Now think about this. If a plant blows up in my backyard, do we think only one person's going to call? I don't think so. So what happens if 20 neighbors call, right? That doesn't make any sense. But Abbott signed it. The other thing that some of you have heard about that Houston and San Antonio have thrown a lawsuit over, but Dallas has not, is House Bill 2127. Senator Creighton called it the Death Star bill, and it rightly could be. It was actually also filed by Representative Burrows. What is this bill? It basically kills the ordinances on many topics for a city to even try and create. You know why? Because business can sue you, okay? So what areas of code are we talking about? Occupation, business and commerce, labor. Let's see, there's 3 other codes that it affects. So what kind of businesses could sue? You know, Dallas passed an ordinance that sex shops or strip clubs could only operate between X and Y. They can sue Dallas now. Let's say, remember some cities have ordinances on selling puppies from puppy mills, right? They could sue your city if you have an ordinance. Dallas was working on a concrete batch plant ordinance. Concrete batch plants could sue over the ordinance we were going to propose. It does in there, let's say you have rules on irrigators, right, and landscape people. They could sue. Anything that a business could decide threatens their economic life could sue a city. And you guys all heard about the water breaks, right? The 10-minute water breaks. Austin and Dallas are the only ones who have the 10-minute water break rule. Another thing that affects a lot of underserved people, payday lenders. The Baptists, the Catholics, every religious group I know of, because I was at the hearings, begged boroughs not to do this bill because they had worked so hard for cities to pass ordinances to rein in payday lenders. They can now sue. So this is what Abbott's on and what Houston and San Antonio, thank God, are suing over. Because what's next? When I worked the last few sessions, it started with the bag ban. That cities were denied to do any kind of bag ban. Plastic bags. Then we jumped into tree ordinances, right? Everybody remember that? Where cities cannot regulate developers too much on what they could cut and not cut for development. And this is the holy grail. Where does it stop? Where does it stop? So I'm very happy that Houston challenged that. I actually have Houston's 19 pages of cited testimony. I know the attorney who testified for Houston. But this is what we are facing, guys, down at the Capitol. And to me, democracy is eroding in Texas. Whether it's voter suppression, suppressing our cities from local control, or ignoring underserved and environmental justice communities even more, and letting industry run roughshod over them. So, with that, I can't operate a slideshow, but, so, as I said, Texas has failed us on environmental justice. Not one bill passed. But they managed to pass bills like we're going to have a 50% natural gas portfolio. And you know that bond issue that David was talking about? You know who that benefits? The energy proposition? Berkshire Hathaway. We called it down at the Capitol the backdoor Berkshire Hathaway bill. Because for sessions, Berkshire Hathaway has tried and wanted to build plants in Texas. But if you, gas plants, natural gas plants. And if you listen to the testimony in the Senate in Business and Commerce, the very first person who testifies is the competitive Texas Power Organization, who says, we don't want this, hello, we don't want subsidies. You know why? It's gonna destroy the competitive market in Texas. And every natural gas, every power plant operator, period, knows it, but Abbott's doing it anyway. So, with that said, if you are interested in the legislature and my bill sheets, during session, I have calls every single week about what bills are moving, what bills are dying, who's offering what, and you're feel free to join me. I know people like Diane Tassian, Susie Gosley from the Dallas group. I've got folks from Fort Worth, Lee, that all join. The other thing I have, if you want, I have a sign-up sheet in the back. I do have what I call eco meetups. And what that is any group that works on environmental things in town can be on the call, tell folks what's going on with certain things and what they need. One of the things I'm working on right now is the Dallas budget, trying to get more environmental money into the Dallas climate plan. So with that, David and I will take questions. Thanks. Yes, sir.
I recall a lot of the same bills you're talking about, and I find that most of them are out of committee.
That's true.
And you can, I was wondering who are the legislatures that need our support, because we're the ones who submit these, and I don't think it will go back again because they just time. I think that perhaps there's a way of encouraging them to know it's a good fight.
It's often not them knowing it's a good fight. It's they're appointed to that committee for a reason that the bills don't move. It's Patrick and Phelan get to appoint who the chairs are of those committees. And I will tell you, because I've worked energy a lot, that I can't tell you how many times I've had to deal with Tom Craddock from Midland on the Energy Resource Committee. And some of these committee chairs, to be honest, are picked to make sure certain kinds of bills don't get out. And it's unfortunate. I know this is really depressing to hear. But it's like this. You know, some people say, how do you go back there every session? Right? I write bills, I file bills. Sometimes the best thing some of us do as environmental advocates down at the Capitol is kill bills. And we'll kill them any way we can. We'll have other lobbyists we know write something benign. For instance, Birdwell had a bill that said, only the TCEQ has control over greenhouse gases, has direct control over greenhouse gases. And it was meant to kill all the climate plans Plano and other cities are doing. Well, here's the deal. We let that bill go, you know why? No cities have direct control over greenhouse gases when we do ordinances. It's indirect. So the bill is moot. It was signed, but it's moot because cities, when they do ordinances, only have indirect control over greenhouse gases. Only the EPA and TCEQ have direct control. So sometimes we'll slide in language to kill bills. Sometimes we'll try and get bills held up in calendar until the cows come home and the session's over. I mean, we'll do all sorts of things, but a lot of our time is spent, at least in recent years, is killing bad bills. And we get more done now.
Yeah.
Do you see this as like a blue state, red state thing? Like most of the red states are like Texas and the blue states are hopefully more in, for the environment? Or what do you think?
To a certain extent. And one thing we have to realize is oil is king in Texas. It creates 1 out of every 6 jobs. And you also have to look at where the donations are going in this state. I will tell you this. All the time I've worked the legislature, just as we've seen nationally, the bipartisanship that we used to have and reasonableness has eroded more and more and more. And it's so unfortunate because there are a lot of good bills out there that would benefit everybody and underserved communities. But you need to have the political will to make a move, right? And do the right thing. I work eminent domain. I work with Republicans, Farm Bureau, all the time on that topic. It is one of the few bipartisan issues there were. But you know what I got passed on that this year? 0. You know why? We got 5 bills passed last session, and it made industry go nuts. Because when you slow down eminent domain or make it harder, it's more expensive, more time consuming for a project, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm happy. I do work bipartisan. Unfortunately, too often on the environmental stuff, it doesn't happen.
Can I add something to that? Sure. In our Texas Constitution, there's a phrase that talks about the full exploitation of the land. This is regarding oil and gas. So we're kind of starting at a difficult spot in the fact that the state has always been oil and gas.
Yeah.
Even when Democrats were totally in charge, we had a very strong lobby of the oil and gas industry. So that's really what we have is an oil and gas state. And so we're trying our best to fight that tendency. And of course, they do side more with a certain party now. But it's still a difficult fight. But just keep in mind that the Constitution itself grants that opportunity. And hardly anywhere else in the country can an oil and gas company use eminent domain for their own private gain. The way we learned it was that the 5th Amendment, which includes eminent domain in the United States Constitution, talks about for a public purpose, right? A train or a bus line or a road or whatever we can all use. But in Texas, an oil and gas company can use eminent domain to build a pipeline anywhere, just about.
And only 2% of what they ship has to be on a pipeline available to anybody else. And nobody checks it. Nobody checks it.
The other thing I wanted to mention about the bills, there were a lot of good bills by Republicans and Democrats that were vetoed by Governor Abbott. Not because he didn't like the bill, but because he was having a fight with the Senate over another issue. And that was his way of getting back so some of his own Republican senators and representatives had hard-fought bills that got bipartisan support, died because of veto, because he was not happy with the Senate at that particular time.
Like take Senator Schwerner. I've worked with Senator Schwerner's staff for years on eminent domain. He's the one who got most of the eminent domain bills passed last session. But Senator Schwerner carried the only concrete bill up to Abbott. It got vetoed, right? So, you can work in a bipartisan way, but it's far and few between that they get accepted by the government.
He's like Evelyn and Misti come back up.
Yeah, come on back. Just in case there's any other questions. If there's not, I want to ask all of you to maybe address the young people in Montana that one.
Oh, yeah.
Environmental case, about having a safe, clean environment. Do you see that as a movement, that will be made?
Young people are like creating lawsuits or?
Well, they won a lawsuit that they sued the state over a safe and clean environment, and the courts ruled.
Yeah, I saw a similar case, where some elderly Swiss women also sued, their government to provide them basically taking years off their life. So yeah, I think, look, I got involved, I grew up with climate change, taught at primary school and everything else, and that's not something, all children in America are getting the chance to have, which is disturbing, because they are going to be most impacted. So, yes, I think the youth climate movement has been critical to compelling the older generation to invest in our future.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Well, young people are important, and I was glad to see that particular fight was won. Of course, it's a local fight, and probably we'll see if it sticks. But it was a big victory for those young people. And from what I understand, they did their own work. They had a little bit of help advice from attorneys, but it was their case. And so that judge probably wanted to highlight the fact that these young people cared enough to take that case as far as they did. But I'll tell you, I teach part-time at Dallas College. I teach Texas and U.S. government. And I often ask my students what's important to them, what issues are important. Today, I actually had to go copy the syllabus because this is the first week. I said, okay, you all spend about 10 minutes, and while I go make the copies and talk about among yourselves, I broke them into 3 different groups, and you come up with some issues that are most important to you, and you tell me what what you've learned in the news and so forth. I had 3 classes, one on Monday, Wednesday, 2 on Tuesday, Thursday, and every one of them came back with 2 issues. One was the gun violence. The other one was climate change. Those are the top 2 issues for young people. Gun violence and climate change, that they want something done. And we need to make sure that that happens.
And the only thing I'll add to that is a group of young folks in El Paso tried to get a climate charter passed in El Paso. Unfortunately, it didn't pass, but it ended up at oil and gas, spent a bloody fortune trying to get it defeated. But it got the legislature's attention, and they created a bill that said, if you want a climate charter, it has to be approved by the legislature first in order for you to put it on the ballot. Haven't signed it, but here's the way around that. For Plano, Louisville, who's ever doing climate plans, don't do a charter. Do an ordinance like Dallas did, or a resolution. Just don't do a charter.
Meaning a public vote.
Right, a public vote. There are ways, if you can find the right words in a bill, to get around it, if you work hard. So.
All right, well, we're about 10 minutes away from them locking the doors. I want to thank our guests. Hopefully it inspires people to learn more about the issues and figure out how you can participate in the process, because this all says something about democracy and our future. So without further ado, there are some treats left. There's some little bags